Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Orszag, thank you for your presentation and answers. Last week I was on Fox Business News with Stuart Varney responding to the State of the Union, and he asked me whether or not I thought that raising the highest rate or restoring the pre-Bush tax cut rate on the upper income earners would be an impediment to growth and would stop job creation. I responded to him that as someone who started a business and ran it, has two brothers and a sister, all of whom run businesses, had a father who developed a rather large company when the income tax highest rate was 70%, that I hadn't seen that in my experience. Now, whether it was when President Clinton raised the highest rate or when President Bush lowered it, and so I didn't see any reason to believe that. He responded, he disagreed with me, and I looked at his background. I noticed, at least I couldn't find any evidence that he'd ever run a business or been involved in the private sector. But I did notice that, like you, went to the London School of Economics. So my question is whether you learned anything at the London School of Economics that would give you superior insight to how business people behave in situations like that.
Well, unlike him, but I guess like you, I started and ran a small business, which we subsequently sold, and I would join you in saying the key thing for a small business is not the marginal tax rate, especially if all you're doing is returning it to the levels that existed during the 1990s, but rather it is demand for your product, access to capital, and good workers, all of which this budget is trying to focus on. Get the economy back on its feet to promote demand, a variety of steps to promote access to capital, including through the Small Business Administration, and the new proposal that the President was speaking about today to spur small business lending. And then finally, in terms of workers and the workforce, investing in education, because those are the workers of the future.
Right. Thank you for clearing that up for me. I have to turn now to a more parochial subject. It definitely affects my state, Kentucky, but I think it also affects other states, including possibly the ranking members. This is the question of LIFO. The budget proposes the elimination of the LIFO accounting method.
Yep.
In my state, that would dramatically affect the bourbon industry, which is an incredibly important economic factor in my state. I know it affects the wine business and many other businesses in which aging is a factor, aging of inventory. The President, and I applaud these goals, has suggested that we want to expand our exports, we want to increase our manufacturing base, and we obviously want to add jobs. By eliminating LIFO and doing it not just prospectively but retroactively, and requiring that the businesses that have been using it legally for many years would have to make up these incredibly large reserves, which is essentially would be an enormous tax cut, which would put some of these companies out of business. Have you thought about the impact in regard to those three goals the administration set of something like the distilling industry and others, where it would seem to be something that would run counter to the goals of the other economic goals that you have, that we all have?
Well, again, and as you know, the purpose of that proposal is that some firms use last in, first out accounting for tax purposes. Sometimes they use different accounting in different settings. And there is a tax policy justification for moving away from that. Now, there may well be consequences for particular industries. Again, I'm going to, given that it's a tax proposal and that you're going to have Secretary Geithner here, defer to him on answering the specific questions involved in particular industries. But again, the underlying tax policy justification for the change, I think, has been well laid out in a variety of articles. We'll have to work with you on the impact on particular industries.
I appreciate that. One last question. It may have been answered here before, but I don't recall it. Some of our colleagues over the weekend were talking about the fact that, making the claim that in terms of non-security discretionary income, that we've raised it 84% in 1 year. Would you respond to that and speculate on maybe how they got that number and whether there's, just comment on that claim, please.
It's not an accurate depiction of the base off of which we are freezing non-security discretionary spending. What happened is that category of spending went from just north of $400 billion in 2008 to just south of $700 billion in 2009 because of the Recovery Act and because of the measures that were necessary to try to mitigate the economic downturn. In 2010, it then declined to roughly $450 billion, a little bit south of that. We are freezing off of that lower level. So it went up, it came down, we're freezing off of the lower level. To claim that we're freezing off of that higher level is simply wrong.
Okay, I appreciate that explanation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. And we now turn